Hi everybody, welcome to our final lecture for our higher education portion of the course. This is chapter 7, and we look at budget fluctuations in higher ed, which is going to be similar to K-12, but it's also a good opportunity to see some perspectives on this as well. So this is the last chapter in our higher education book. I really recommend that if you are going to higher ed, you take a course on higher education finance and you get that exposure if you're interested in that perspective. I've had higher ed finance courses, but this is a brief perspective on it. We go a lot more in depth in other courses throughout the United States. So keep that in mind. There's only one more chapter in the traditional textbook for the course, so be aware of that as well. And then that'll be it. That'll be all the material that we cover. So, as I've stated, on and on and on and again, in the United States throughout 2008 was the horrible year for budget cuts and where all the problems really occurred and caused issues. Personnel were impacted, reduction of benefits. We're still recovering almost 10 years later from it. College is changing. There's lower enrollment. Small private colleges are losing people, and they're switching to online schools. They're switching to programs that are going to get you done sooner, that might be more quantity driven than not quality driven. And costs are going up throughout the United States of college, and costs are unequal for schools. So graduate school is who's affected the most. It's why we have more and more online courses. And a number of programs are switching to this online model, which can be good, it can be bad, but there has to be consistency in it. And I think that's important. And anytime you do an online program or online course, you at least need to provide the students with consistency and make sure that they're getting what they paid for. So 2009, government reduced funding for higher education by $30 billion. Many programs suffered, faculty reassigned, relocated, and capital projects were abandoned as well. If you have the right people and the right politicians in place, it's fluctuated over and over again in Florida, so you have differences of people and different people coming in that are making these statements and making these claims as well. Sometimes fundraising doesn't work. You have your annual fund drives and your opportunities to recruit people, and sometimes that doesn't go anywhere. Sometimes people don't compete after the first few years of funding drives. It can be an issue as well when you're relying on something that could never come. So you also have costly events. In one of the courses I teach a school reform course, and I looked at higher education and traditional K-12 education throughout Louisiana. Major challenges there after Hurricane Katrina hit. And if bad construction hits, or if there's an unusual event and there's not capital insurance, and you roll the dice and you don't have that insurance, it can be very costly to the school system, and that can create challenges and problems as well. So sometimes people stay too long. Faculty and staff stay at an institution for way too long, even though it's time for them to leave and time for them to get out. But they have their jobs for life in higher education. And you got to know this. So you know that when you go into this position, some people are going to be there forever, and you can't force them to retire even if you want them to. They might not be relevant anymore. It might not be something they care about anymore. But it's something that's still there, and it's still pertinent, and you have to pay for them, and you can't get rid of them. Florida manages this well, but other states really don't. So different times too, the institution can look at different ways to reduce the budget. I'm going to give you some of the different approaches, and you can determine whether this is something you've seen in your organization or not. I'm really just giving you broad ideas on this because we could spend an entire class talking about budget reductions and fiscal responsibility. It's offered as an entire class where I'm working now, so keep that in mind. I'm giving you a 20-minute video just to expose you to some of these ideas. So there has to be time to institute cost savings and budget cuts. If you can cut and make the cuts, it can save personnel or programming. You must consider if the information that's provided is reliable and it's good information. If the board will take a bond, and they'll say, we realize that we're gonna avoid a budget cut, but we're gonna take a loan out. That can help the current budget, but you have to think about the capacity what that could do long term. It could just destroy an organization. So the budget freeze isn't a reduction, but everybody has at least worked somewhere that has done a budget freeze at some point. They stop your conference expenses. They stop hiring people. They don't give you raises. Most of the time, it's when they're waiting for somebody new to come in and there's a holding pattern in place. And when that happens, you got to be prepared for that because people don't know what the end result is going to be. So how do you cut? Honestly, most of the time, it's done through across-the-board cuts. Everybody is given a percentage and says every program has to cut by 5%, and it's fair. But some departments can't handle it. Other departments have alternate terms of funding. They can get fellowships from other institutions. They can get people to support them, and that can make a massive difference. Most of the time, people will set a priority list and cut programs that are low on that list. It's basically, when people are told their programs aren't good enough, the reality is some programs are much, much, much more important than others. Your doctoral program is probably the cornerstone of this institution. They need this program to go well. They need you to get jobs because that will increase the program and it'll increase the capacity and capabilities there as well. So you could also restructure. And restructuring is fairly drastic. Sometimes you can take a school and change it. Since we're all in education, what normally happens is that an education department becomes part of the Department of Humanities. It's no longer a freestanding school. So people lose their job when this happens because they're streamlined to different departments. If you have a staff secretary, staff program coordinator, they lose their job while the faculty are protected. So sometimes you can eliminate a program. When I did my undergraduate at Pitt, I was in business education at Pitt. And this is an interesting story, but I spent 2 years at Pitt doing business education, and they decided that they didn't have enough capacity to support it anymore, so they were going to streamline my courses into a business program, and I could add on teacher certification later. I was preparing for a teaching job at a district that I wanted back home, and I knew I needed to finish soon, and I needed to be ready as soon as I needed to. Pitt did not support this, and they didn't let me finish my undergrad program, but they transferred me to Robert Morris, and I got to finish there, and they paid the difference in price, which was fantastic. So I did get lucky on that, but I mean, that was 15 years ago. I think it's highly unethical to not let people finish a program. That's huge. So when budget cuts happen, the unit members are the ones that really are the ones that are struggling. They're the people that are kind of your coordinators. They're in between departments. They're the ones that are going to be most worried about losing their job. You want to try to be humane when you're cutting positions, and you want to make sure that everybody's kind of expecting it to happen and it's transparent. So, it's when faculty get cut, that sends a horrible message to students. I believe this, and call me crazy on this or call me wrong, don't fill a tenure line and let it hang until funding returns. Just don't fill it. Don't cut. Let the people retire and don't fill the position. If you can do an early retirement, do that, but that really should be done as long as you follow the guidelines that are presented. And I think cutting a line itself is better than cutting a person. So people are going to gossip. They're going to share rumors when this happens. Make sure that everybody's transparent, and make sure that people are given clear updates and they know what's going on. Even if somebody's losing their job, they do have an obligation to students and the institution to finish. Don't lose sight of that as well. So ask for suggestions from colleagues, figure out what it looks like, and find ways to reduce and cut when you hear from others. But make sure that everything is documented and it's well in line, and make sure that you're doing stuff to help the program. You have contingency funds for a reason. Don't lose sight of contingency funds, because they're there as a holding pattern. And If you're in an emergency, it's an emergency. That's what a contingency fund is for. Don't let them sit. That's the worst possible thing that you can do as a budget manager. Some people are ready to leave. Some people don't want to be there for a 12-month appointment. Some people would rather be there for 10 months. I've seen 3 different times where instead of cutting a faculty position, people switch from an 11-month appointment as an assistant professor to a 10-month appointment. And I never would. I want to work 24 hours a day. I want to work year-round. That's just me. That's who I am. But it's a good thing if you're keeping people from being burned out, and some people will switch to that model. So don't make promises. There are legal implications to doing it, especially with a union. But don't pass the buck and talk to somebody else. Be open and transparent, which I've said in every one of our discussions we've had on finance so far. Transparency is the key. Cut back on your non-essentials. One of the examples that I had that I think is kind of funny is one of the previous places I worked at gave us all faculty polo shirts that we were to wear, and gave us 3 of them. It was a non-essential cost, and really, we had these polo shirts and they were provided to us, but the organization shouldn't be wasting money on polo shirts, especially because that was like a $1,500 expense that could be done for send somebody to a conference to advance research. So if you can outsource, that's not bad. Technology support being outsourced, I have no problems with that. If you have a technology center that handles your concerns, great. If you have one that's housed at the main part of campus and it's not departmentalized, great. But that can save a lot of money too, because technology jobs cost money to institutions. Sometimes donors pull out. If you have other opportunities or partnerships, try to explore them. If you can make a program profitable, you can move up in higher education. If you can add charges like faculty parking to increase money, that can be used for conference funding. It's possible. So if there's somebody who wants to work out of another department, like for instance, I'm doctorally qualified to teach in a business school and I'm doctorally qualified to teach in an education school. I can go to a business school and I can adjunct easily. Let's say the department is losing money and somebody wants to teach more. I could go over to our School of Business and say, hey, let me teach. I can teach courses in the School of Business. It can save the position, it can help people, and that's maybe the best way to do it and keep people employed. But if somebody has dual certification, you can certainly do that. So you need to be consistent in the decisions that you make. If you were told that you need to do a 5% cut across all programs, don't cut one by a smaller amount than the other. Make sure that the people from above are doing what they need, and be fair and be consistent. If you were given a directive, follow that directive, because people are going to be upset if you don't. Decisions are difficult. You're going to have to make things that are tough to say in higher ed. And people are impacted by those decisions. Students have to come first, and decisions need to protect the programs that serve the students more than anything else. Florida is odd. This is a cyclical profession, and we're really based on what the state says and what the state does. 2015 was awesome for higher education. 2011 wasn't. If you documented what you did right during a tough time, and you move it to the good times, you can save money, and that can help if the tide turns. 'Cause the tide's going to turn in the state again. I'm sure it is. It's going to, and you got to be prepared for that. So the last 3 things really are tied to what happens when you get more money. If you do get more money, there are 3 different things that you can do. You can do across-the-board funding, targeted investments, or investing in new programs. So, across-the-board funding. When funds come back, they distribute the funds across the programs. I don't like that idea. I like the idea of distributing funds in the form of a uniform raise based off of rank. Having raises from person to person does not encourage faculty to raise it doesn't help faculty be confident in their role in the position. If you give a consistent raise based on rank, I think that's a smart move, and that's certainly more acceptable than anything else. Targeted investments is making sure that you have strategic plans in place when you have more money. You protect the future, but you can use it to improve the organization. Things like carpeting, signs, something promoting the building. That's good because it helps. It helps improve morale, but you're not spending specific money on something. So, once again, I got to say new programs. You have to invest in programs, contain them, and grow them. When you're recruiting new students, you have to supplement that with new faculty members, new staff, and people that can do program assessment. If they can sustain in both good times and bad, that's a positive. So I hope you got a great overview of higher education and the basics from our textbook. You have to go, we're going to go into a lot more depth to explore specific higher ed finance topics. If I can do anything else to help, let me know. But that's a good introduction to our course. So thank you very much and hope you enjoyed this component of the course.